I never knew what a real mother was supposed to be like. I mean, I had a mother, someone who gave birth to me. But love, warm hugs, late-night talks, someone who made me feel safe when the world was falling apart, I didn't know any of that. It was like growing up next to a stranger who happened to live in the same house. She never smiled at me, never said I love you, never tucked me in at night. Most of the time, I was just there, like a piece of furniture. You don't talk to the table. You just put things on it and walk away. Sometimes, I would stand by her door and just wait for her to call me in. Just once. Just to say, "Come sit with me." But she never did. Instead, she yelled. A lot. I remember once, when I was about 6, I drew her a picture in school. It was of a house with the sun in the corner and a stick figure mom and daughter holding hands. I was so proud. I ran home that day, holding the paper like it was made of gold. I handed it to her, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. She didn't even look at it. She just said, "I'm tired. Go to your room." That night, I cried into my pillow and ripped the paper into tiny pieces. That was the first time I realized my love didn't matter to her. It was like that for years. Birthdays? Forgotten. Holidays? Lonely. School plays? She never came. I stopped telling her things. I stopped trying. And after a while, I stopped feeling anything. I started learning from the world instead. I watched movies where mothers hugged their daughters. I watched girls in school get picked up with smiles and snacks waiting in the car. I would just stand there, pretending to fix my shoelaces, hoping no one would see that no one was coming for me. I had to grow up fast. No one taught me how to be gentle. No one taught me how to love properly. I just guessed. And most of the time I guessed wrong. So, when I met him, when I met Caleb, everything felt new. He was kind. So kind. Like the kind of person you read about in books. He held doors open. He listened. He remembered small things I said and brought them up later like they were precious. And he loved his mother. God, he loved his mother so much. At first, I thought it was cute. He talked about her all the time. Said she was his hero. Said she worked 3 jobs to send him to college. Said he owed everything to her. When I finally met her, I understood why. She was warm. Not fake warm, real warm. The kind of woman who hugs you like you belong somewhere. Who looks into your eyes like she sees something worth loving. She made me tea. Asked about my day. Called me sweetheart, like it was the most natural thing. But instead of feeling happy, I felt small. I didn't know how to explain it. Every time I saw them together, I felt like an outsider. Like I was watching something from behind a glass wall. The way he looked at her, smiled at her, held her hand when they walked. I never had that. Never even dreamed of it. And now I was right in the middle of it, but not part of it. I started feeling jealous. Not because she did anything wrong. Not because he did. But because I didn't know how to handle love like that. Real love. Unbreakable love. One time, we were out at dinner, just the 2 of us, and he excused himself to call his mom to check if she'd eaten. He said she sometimes forgets to eat when she's tired. And I got mad. Not out loud, but inside. I smiled and nodded, but something boiled in my chest. Why was he always thinking about her? Why was she always around? Why couldn't we just be alone? I started complaining more. Slowly. Do you have to call her every day? Why is she coming with us to the event? Do you really need to tell her everything we do? It wasn't fair and I knew it. But I couldn't help it. Because deep down, I wasn't mad at her. I wasn't even mad at him. I was mad at the hole inside me. The mother-shaped hole that never healed. The place in my heart that never learned what it meant to be loved like that. And I hated myself for it. But I kept going. I pretended to be okay. Until one day I snapped. I told him I was tired of always being second. I told him I couldn't take his mother always being around. And I said the words that still haunt me today. Choose between me and your mom. I didn't mean to say it like that. I didn't mean it as a threat. I just wanted him to notice me. To see that I was hurting. That I felt invisible. I thought he would argue. I thought he would ask me what was wrong. I thought he would pull me close and say, "Let's fix this." But instead, he walked away. 7 days passed. He didn't call. I waited, cried, regretted everything. On the 7th day, he called. My heart jumped. I thought he was choosing me. But all he said was, "I've packed your things. They'll be delivered tomorrow. I'm blocking your number. Take care. Then silence. I begged the air around me not to be true. I held my phone for hours, hoping he'd change his mind. But he didn't. I lost him. Not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know how to love him right. I couldn't stop thinking about his mother. How she looked at him. How she smiled when he laughed. How she stood beside him at every event. Proud, strong, loving. And then I thought about my mother. I thought about all the nights I cried myself to sleep. All the times I wished someone, anyone, would fight for me. But no one did. I started to wonder, what if my pain turned me into someone I didn't want to be? I needed to understand. I needed to heal. So I called her. I called his mom. She picked up. Soft voice. No anger. Just quiet. I expressed my wish to speak with her, woman to woman, and she kindly agreed. I told her everything. From the beginning. My childhood. My mother. My pain. My fear. She didn't interrupt. And when I finished, she said, "Now I understand." Then she told me her story. How she raised her son alone. How she worked herself to the bone. How she sacrificed sleep, health, and dreams just to see him smile. She said, "I never meant to come between you. I only wanted to be part of his world. I never thought I'd be a threat." And then she asked me something that broke me. She said, "If you become a mother one day and someone asks your child to choose between you and them, how would you feel?" I couldn't answer. I just cried. That was the moment I knew. I had been wrong. But I also knew something else. I had never been taught how to be right. I didn't grow up with love. I grew up with silence. And silence taught me to survive, not to love. But I want to learn. I want to be better. After I ended the call with his mom, I sat on my bed for hours. It was silent. Not the kind of silence you get when everything is calm. This one was heavy. It pressed against my chest like a rock. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just kept hearing her voice in my head. If someone ever asked your child to choose between you and them, how would you feel? I had no answer. I've spent so many years angry at my own mother for not being there. For never making me feel wanted. For never asking me how I felt, or holding me close when I cried. I used to think I would never be like her. That I would be better. Kinder. Warmer. But here I was, doing something worse. I didn't just walk away from someone I loved. I tried to take him away from the one person who gave him everything. And I lost him because of it. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed up replaying every moment I had with Caleb. Every smile. Every walk. Every time we laughed until we cried. I remembered how he'd look at me like I was the only person in the world. I remember the way he always made sure I felt safe, heard, loved. Then I remember the last phone call. "Take care." That was all he said. No anger. No shouting. Just quiet. Because Caleb wasn't the kind of person who fought with people. He just walked away when he was hurt too deeply. And I had hurt him in the worst way. I don't know when I started crying, but I couldn't stop. I was shaking. I felt like a part of me had died, and no one was there to help me bury it. I called out to no one. I whispered, "I'm sorry," into my empty room, hoping the walls would carry the words to him. But they didn't. They just stayed there, stuck. The next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen. My hair was messy. I looked like someone who had lost everything, and in some way I had. But I also saw something else in that mirror. I saw a girl who had never been taught how to love, but who was ready to learn. And that's when I decided I was going to change. Not for Caleb. Not for anyone else. For me. Because I deserve to be better. I deserve to heal. I started with something simple. I wrote a letter. Not to Caleb. To myself. I wrote down everything I remembered about my childhood. Every moment I felt unwanted. Every night I cried. Every birthday that was forgotten. Every time I tried to talk to my mother and was shut down. It took me hours. But when I finished, I felt like a weight had lifted from my heart. Like I had given all the pain a place to rest outside of me. Then I did something even harder. I called my mom. It had been over a year since we last spoke. The last conversation ended with shouting and me hanging up on her after she told me I was too emotional. She answered after 2 rings. "Hello," she said, like she didn't know who it was. "Hi, it's me. Emily." She was quiet for a moment, then said, Oh, I didn't expect warmth. I didn't expect tears or apologies. I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to ask you something, I said. My voice was shaking. Did you ever want to be a mom? Another pause. Then she said, I did once. That broke me. I sat down on the floor and just let the tears come. She told me things I never knew. How she was only 20 when she had me. How my father left 2 weeks later. How she had no money, no help, and no idea how to raise a child. She said every time she looked at me, she felt like a failure. Not because of me, but because she didn't know how to be what I needed. She said, I thought being cold would make you strong. I thought if I didn't show you love, you'd never depend on anyone. She thought she was protecting me. But what she did was break me. I told her that. Gently. I told her how empty I felt growing up. How invisible. How angry. She cried. For the first time in my life, I heard my mother cry. I'm sorry, she said, over and over again. I didn't know. I didn't know how much I was hurting you. I didn't forgive her right away. I wasn't ready. But I thanked her for listening. After that call, something changed in me. It wasn't like I woke up healed the next day. But I felt like the healing had begun. I started going to therapy. At first, I didn't want to open up. I just sat there, giving short answers, avoiding eye contact. But my therapist was patient. Week after week, I showed up. Some days I cried. Some days I said nothing. Some days I screamed. And slowly I started understanding myself. I learned that my jealousy didn't come from hate. It came from fear. The fear of not being enough. The fear of being replaced. The fear that if someone else had a deeper connection with my partner, I would be left behind. I learned that my need for control came from my lack of safety growing up. That my anger wasn't the problem, it was the pain underneath it. And I learned something important. I am not my past. I don't have to be the girl who ruins everything she touches. I don't have to be the girl who runs away when things get hard. I can be better. I can grow. Months passed. I focused on myself. I took time to do things I loved. I started painting again. I reconnected with old friends. I went on walks. I wrote in journals. I even adopted a cat. Her name is Luna. She sleeps by my side every night. And then one day, I thought about Caleb. Not in a way that made me cry, but in a way that made me smile. I missed him, but I also understood why he walked away. And I respected it, because losing him helped me find myself. Reaching out to his mom was one of the best decisions I made. Sitting down with her for a face-to-face conversation really turned things around for the better. Not long after, Caleb reached out and asked if we could meet up to talk. I was so excited, I couldn't wait to see him again. When we finally met, we both opened up about everything. It was emotional, honest, and ended with forgiveness. We didn't get back together, but we became really good friends. Later, I was invited to his mom's place for dinner. She welcomed me warmly, and it felt good to see her smile again. The night after the dinner with Caleb and his mother, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was sad this time, but because something inside me had changed. It was hard to explain. I had spent so much time being angry at the closeness between Caleb and his mom, so much time being jealous, confused, and then heartbroken, that I never thought there would come a day when I'd feel peace just sitting at a table with the both of them. And yet I did. When I got back home, I looked around my room and smiled. For the first time in a while, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I'd learned. Still, it wasn't all perfect. Healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in moments. And there were still nights I held my pillow and cried quietly, not because I wanted Caleb back as a boyfriend, but because I was still trying to forgive myself. I had ruined something beautiful. And that thought still followed me. A few days later, Caleb sent me a voice message. His tone was light and calm. Hey, I'm just checking in. Mom and I were remembering how much she laughed when you said the mashed potatoes were sent from heaven. You really lit up that room. Hope you're doing okay. I laughed. I actually laughed. Not the polite kind. The real kind. I replied, hey, tell her she still owes me the recipe. And yes, I'm doing okay. Thank you. From then on, our friendship grew like a soft light in a quiet room. Not loud, not fast. Just gentle. We started seeing each other once in a while. Not for anything serious, but just to catch up. Sometimes we'd meet at the park. Other times at a small coffee place near his work. It was strange at first. There were awkward silences, moments when our eyes met and both of us would quickly look away. But eventually, we found a rhythm. One day, as we sat by the window in the cafe, I asked, "Do you ever miss us?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I miss the good parts, and I'm grateful for the hard parts because they taught us both something." That hurt a little, but it was also the most honest answer I could have hoped for. I nodded. We didn't speak much after that during the outing, but somehow it felt like one of the most important conversations we had. As time passed, I started focusing more on myself. I began volunteering at a shelter for teenage girls. It felt good to be around them, to hear their stories, to help them smile again. Some of those girls reminded me of myself. Girls who never had mothers that looked them in the eye and said, "I love you." One girl, her name was Kiara, broke down in front of me during an art session. She had drawn a picture of a house, but all the windows were closed and the door was locked. "What's this?" I asked gently. She looked down. "That's my home," she said. "It never lets me in." I blinked back tears. In that moment, I understood that my pain wasn't just mine. There were many of us, girls who grew up knocking on emotional doors that were never opened. That night I wrote in my journal, maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I was just learning. The more I gave, the more I received. Life has a way of healing you when you start helping others. One evening, Kayla called me. "Hey, Mom wants to start a small foundation to support single mothers and kids." She asked if I knew anyone who could help her plan the storytelling side of it, and I mentioned you. My heart skipped. She said she wants to include real-life stories. Stories like yours. Yours inspired her. I paused. "You told her my story?" "Only what you already told her. The rest is yours to tell if you want." I said yes. Working with Caleb's mom was strange at first. But she was kind, patient. She didn't treat me like a stranger, or a girl who once hurt her son. She treated me like someone she believed in. Once, while we were reviewing some story submissions together, she looked at me and said, "Emily, you don't have to carry guilt forever. You're allowed to move on. You're not the same girl who made those mistakes." I nodded, but I didn't reply. Tears welled up in my eyes again. "I'm proud of who you're becoming," she added. Those words stayed with me. As the foundation grew, so did my confidence. I started speaking at small events, sharing bits of my past and how it shaped me. I talked about jealousy, about not understanding love because I never saw it. I told the truth, and people listened. Some cried, some clapped, some just stared. But they heard me. One evening after one of my talks, I stood outside the venue, staring at the stars. Caleb came out with a coffee in hand and stood next to me. "You were amazing in there," he said. "Thanks," I whispered. "You've come a long way, Em." "I'm still walking," I said. He smiled. "Aren't we all?" There was something beautiful about that moment. We weren't a couple, but we were something. One night I had a dream. I was in a small house. There were flowers on the table and laughter in the kitchen. A little girl ran up to me and hugged me. "Mommy," she said. I woke up crying. It made me think, if I ever become a mother, I want to be the kind of mom I never had. One who shows up. One who listens. One who stays. Another few weeks passed. I was doing a school tour for the foundation when I got a call from Caleb. "Can we talk?" We met at a quiet place near a river. I could tell something was on his mind. "I've been thinking," he said, "about life and how sometimes things happen so we can grow even if they hurt." I nodded slowly. "I just wanted to say thank you," he continued. "Not for hurting me, but for growing, for healing, for choosing to become someone better." I looked at him. "Thank you for not hating me." He shook his head. "There was a time I was angry, but never hate. You helped me learn how to draw lines. You helped me appreciate the strength in my mom's love." "I wish I could go back and undo the pain," I whispered. "I don't," he said, "because now I know I'm strong enough to move forward." He reached into his pocket and handed me a small necklace. It had a tiny circle pendant. "It's not romantic," he said quickly. "It's a reminder. Life goes in circles. But if we keep growing, every circle becomes a spiral. Higher, wiser." I held it in my hand. "Thank you." We stood in silence. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I wrote one more thing in my journal. Sometimes, losing love teaches you how to love better. Not just others, but yourself. And with that, I knew my journey was far from over. But at least now, I was walking in the right direction. I didn't expect life to feel this quiet. Not in a bad way, just quieter than before. When you lose someone you love, even if it ends on peaceful terms, there's a certain silence that follows. It's the kind of silence that makes you listen to your own thoughts more. And that's exactly what I was doing these days, listening to myself. Working with Caleb's mother had opened a new chapter in my life. I was helping people, telling stories, encouraging young girls to believe in love again, even if they'd never felt it before. But behind all of that, I was still doing a lot of healing. Healing I didn't even know I needed. One day, while reviewing submissions for the Foundation's upcoming campaign, I came across a story that stopped me cold. It was from a teenage girl named Rachel. Her story was about how her mother had left her and her younger brother in a shelter when she was just 7 years old. She hadn't seen her mom in over a decade. And yet, she still wrote, "Maybe one day she'll come back. I'll wait." I don't know why those words hit me so hard. Maybe because I had stopped waiting a long time ago. Or maybe because deep down, a part of me was still hoping for the same thing. That night, I found myself searching online. I typed my mother's name into a few places, old directories, Facebook, even people's search websites. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Closure? An apology? Or just proof that she still existed? I never got an answer that night. But the search lit a fire inside me that hadn't burned in years. I started writing again. Not just in my journal, but essays. Personal reflections. Things I hadn't dared say out loud. I wrote about growing up feeling invisible. About how my mother used to come home late, smelling like beer and sadness. How I used to cry under the blanket just to muffle the sound. One night, I wrote a letter I never intended to send. It started like this. "Dear Mom, if you ever wonder who I became someone who had to mother herself." I folded the letter and tucked it into my drawer. I don't know why. Maybe it was a step I needed to take. A week later, Caleb and I ran into each other at a bookstore. Neither of us knew the other would be there. He was looking at a biography about a tech founder. I was flipping through poetry books. We both laughed. "Fate," I said, half smiling. "Maybe," he replied. We got coffee and sat outside under a yellow umbrella. It was one of those chilly afternoons that made your nose pink and your hands warm around the cup. We talked about work, about books, about the Foundation. And then, somehow, we started talking about our dreams. "I think I want to start a podcast," he said. "Something about real people, real stories. The kind of stuff no one ever talks about until it's too late." "That sounds amazing," I said. "You should do it." "What about you?" he asked. "What's your next step?" I paused. "I want to find my voice again. Not just in helping others, but in helping myself." He nodded. "You're doing that. Every day." There was a long silence between us. Not uncomfortable, just full. "Sometimes I still miss you," I whispered. He looked down. "Me too." But we didn't talk about getting back together. We both knew we were in different places now. That evening, I started planning something new. A blog, maybe even a memoir one day. A space where I could speak freely and maybe help others who felt like me. But before that, I knew I had to do something I had been avoiding for years. I had to go back to the house I grew up in. I hadn't seen that house in over 10 years. The last time I stood on that porch, I was 18, with a suitcase in one hand and a heart full of confusion. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't scream or cry. I just walked away. Now, as I stood in front of it again, I noticed the paint had chipped more than I remembered. The lawn was still patchy, and the same old mailbox leaned to one side. Nothing had changed, and somehow that made it harder. I knocked on the door, even though I knew she might not be there. I had found an old address online and hoped it was still valid. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I turned and sat on the front steps. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stared at the cracked sidewalk, letting old memories flood in. The night I broke my arm falling off my bike and she told me to walk it off. The day she forgot my birthday and blamed the calendar. The first time she called me a mistake. I had blocked out most of it, but being here brought it all back. Just as I was about to leave, a voice called out from across the yard. "Can I help you?" I turned to see an older woman standing by the fence with a grocery bag in hand. "I used to live here," I said. "My name is Emily." Her eyes softened. "You're Rose's daughter." I nodded. "She moved a few years ago," the woman said. "Left in a hurry. Said she was going to live with a man in another town. Haven't heard from her since." "Oh," I whispered. "Are you okay?" I smiled weakly. "Yeah. I just wanted to see the place again." She walked over and sat beside me. She didn't ask many questions. She just listened as I talked. About the nights I cried myself to sleep. About the holidays that never felt like holidays. About the woman who brought me into this world, but never seemed happy that I was here. "I know she didn't know how to love me," I said, "but it still hurts." She reached into her bag and handed me a wrapped chocolate bar. Sometimes, sweetness can still come after bitterness. We both laughed a little. When I got back to my apartment, I felt a strange peace. I didn't find my mother. But maybe I found what I needed more, a way to say goodbye to the hurt. I spent the next few days writing everything down. My childhood, the way love confused me, the way I almost destroyed something good with Caleb. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to handle care when it came my way. One night, I sat on the floor of my living room and reread the old letter I wrote to my mom. I added something new at the bottom. "And even though you never showed me how to love, I'm still learning how to love myself." I folded it and put it back in the drawer. Then I picked up my phone and opened a new voice memo. "Hi, my name is Emily," I began. "And this is a story about a girl who thought love was a trap until she realized it was the only thing that could set her free." It was the first episode of the podcast I didn't know I was starting. But it was real. And it was mine. I didn't need permission anymore. Not from my past. Not from my mother. Not even from myself. I was finally writing my own story. Weeks passed, and I started hearing from people who listened to the podcast. Strangers, young girls, even grown women. Some said my story gave them the courage to talk to their mothers again. Some said it helped them understand their own silence. A few even said it made them cry, and thank you for that. But one message stood out. It was from a girl named Marissa. She wrote, "You're the first person who made me feel like I wasn't crazy for wanting to be loved by someone who never showed it. Thank you." I read it over and over again. Her words touched a place inside me I didn't even know was still raw. That night I cried. Not because I was sad, but because I was finally starting to understand what healing looked like. It didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending. It meant being okay with the past, while still moving forward. Caleb reached out again. This time it was to invite me to a youth workshop. He was speaking, and he said it would mean a lot if I was there. I said yes without thinking too hard. When I got there, he was already on stage, talking to a group of high school kids about dreams and resilience. I sat at the back, smiling at how confident he had become. After the session, we found a quiet corner outside. The air was cool and the sky was full of stars. "Still feels weird seeing you here," he said with a grin. "Weird good or weird bad?" I teased. "Definitely weird good," he laughed. We talked for a while, and then I asked something I hadn't asked since we broke up. "Do you ever wonder if things could have been different?" He looked thoughtful. "Sometimes. But I think we had to go through that to become who we are now." I nodded. "I think so too." He reached out and squeezed my hand. It wasn't romantic. It was something deeper, like two soldiers who had survived a war together. A week later, I got an email from a publishing house. Someone had read my blog and wanted to talk about turning it into a book. Me. A book. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before replying. I said yes, not because I wanted to be famous, but because if even one person felt seen by my words, it would be worth it. That night, I made a cup of tea and sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me. I picked up my journal and wrote down something I never thought I would. I'm proud of myself, not because I was perfect, not because I had it all figured out, but because I had survived. I had loved and lost, fought and forgiven, and I was still here. More importantly, I was still open. The next day, Caleb called. He was laughing before he even said hello. "What's funny?" I asked. "My mom just told me," she started listening to your podcast. She's obsessed. I burst out laughing. Really? She says you sound like a counselor and a poet had a baby. We both laughed until our stomachs hurt. Then he paused. Hey, you free for dinner tonight? Mom's cooking. I smiled. I'd love that. That evening, we had lasagna and garlic bread and talked about everything and nothing. His mom gave me the warmest hug when I walked in. It felt real. At the table, we shared stories and old memories. At one point, Caleb looked over at me and said, "You know, it's kind of wild how far we've come." "It really is," I said. After dinner, we sat on the porch while his mom cleaned up inside. "You've changed," he said. "Is that good?" "It's beautiful," he replied. I felt tears press behind my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. We didn't kiss. We didn't hold hands. But we both knew something powerful had happened. We had turned pain into purpose. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the future. I was ready. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about Marissa's message, the dinner with Caleb and his mother, and how life was finally making sense in a strange way. I wasn't the girl I used to be. I was becoming someone I didn't even think was possible. Someone strong. Someone open. Someone healed. Not fully, but healing still. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old photos. There were pictures of me and Caleb during our early days, goofy selfies, fancy dinners, beach walks, and that one ridiculous cooking experiment that ended in a smoke alarm going off. I smiled through each memory, but my heart didn't ache the same way it used to. Then I stumbled across a picture I didn't expect to see. It was of my mother. I had taken it secretly when I was around 13. She was asleep on the couch, still wearing her uniform from the diner she used to work at. Her mouth was slightly open, a half-empty bottle on the floor, and the TV remote still in her hand. I remember staring at her that night, wondering what kind of woman she used to be before life broke her. That memory hit me hard. For so long, I saw her only as the villain in my story. But now, I wasn't sure. Maybe she was a victim too. Of her past. Of her choices. Of a system that never taught her how to love. I suddenly had the urge to write again. This time, I didn't write to her. I wrote to myself. Dear Emily, I'm sorry you had to grow up feeling like you weren't enough. I'm sorry you had to learn about love through loss. But look at you now. You're standing. You're shining. You're loving. And that makes you more than enough. I read those words over and over until tears fell down my cheeks. The next morning, I met Caleb and his mom at a community center. They were organizing a food drive, and I volunteered to help. It was chaos, but the good kind. Kids were running around with canned goods, teens were stacking boxes, and the elderly were sharing recipes while packing groceries. At one point, an older woman came up to me and said, "Are you the girl from that podcast? The one who talks about mother wounds?" I nodded, a little shy. She took my hand and said, "Thank you. You helped me talk to my daughter after 10 years. I almost broke down right there. That night, I sat with Caleb on the porch again. It was becoming our thing. He looked at me, eyes full of admiration. "You're really doing something special, Em." "So are you," I said. There was silence again, but it was peaceful. Then he asked, "Have you thought about dating again?" I laughed nervously. "Not really. Still figuring out what I want." "Well, if you ever do," he said softly, "whoever gets you better understand how rare you are." I didn't respond, but I felt it. In my chest. In my soul. The next day, I recorded another podcast episode. This time, I talked about forgiveness. Not just forgiving others, but forgiving yourself. I ended it with this. You're not broken because you were hurt. You're beautiful because you kept going. And for the first time in my life, I believe that too. The next few weeks turned into a blur of meaningful work. The podcast was gaining traction. Invitations came in for interviews, speaking engagements, and panel discussions. People wanted to hear more about healing from emotional neglect, how to love after brokenness, and how to rebuild identity from ashes. And though I spoke often about the past, I found myself living more in the present than I ever had. One Saturday morning, I visited a women's shelter where I had been volunteering. A young woman named Janine asked if she could talk to me in private. She had listened to my story and said it gave her the courage to ask for help. We sat on a bench under the shade of an old oak tree. She was only 19, but already looked years older from life's wear and tear. She shared how her mother had bounced from relationship to relationship, leaving her behind in strangers' homes. How she'd grown up learning how to survive but not how to feel. Every word she spoke felt like a mirror to my own past. "I didn't know what love looked like," she said, "until I heard how you described your boyfriend's mother. That kind of love, I didn't know it was real." I reached over and held her hand. "It is real, and you deserve it." Later that evening, I called Caleb and told him about Janine. He listened quietly, as he always did. "You really have a gift," he said. "You take pain and turn it into a path for others." "I'm just trying to do what I wish someone had done for me," I replied. He was silent for a moment. "You're doing that, and more." We decided to co-host a live podcast session with guests, real people with real stories. Caleb said he'd handle the tech and promotion. I'd focus on the voices. The first session had 10 attendees. The second had 50. By the fourth week, over 300 people joined the live stream. Some shared their stories. Others just listened, finding comfort in knowing they weren't alone. That night, after the biggest session yet, Caleb and I stayed on the call long after the guests had left. "I never told you this," he said. "But when we first broke up, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I blinked." "Why?" "Because I kept wondering if I had failed you," he said. "If I hadn't done enough to make you feel safe." My chest tightened. "It wasn't your fault. I didn't even know what safety felt like." "But you do now," he said gently. "I'm learning." He smiled. "Me too." By the time we ended the call, it was nearly 2 a.m. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, but this time I wasn't haunted by memories. I was filled with quiet hope. 2 days later, I received a letter in the mail. It had no return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. It said, "I'm sorry, Mom." No name, no explanation, just those words. I stared at it for a long time. My hands shook. My eyes blurred. I had imagined this moment in so many ways. A dramatic reunion, a tearful apology, a heartfelt letter. But this was enough, because it was real. And maybe that was all I ever needed. I folded the letter and placed it next to the one I had written years ago. The one where I told myself I was enough. 2 letters. One from the woman who gave me life, and one from the woman I was becoming. The next evening, I shared the story on my podcast. I didn't give details, just the emotion, the lesson. I ended it by saying, sometimes, healing doesn't come in big, sweeping gestures. Sometimes, it's just 2 words written on paper that tell you everything you needed to hear. That episode got more messages than any I had done before. Women saying they'd write letters to their daughters. Others saying they'd try to find the courage to say sorry, even if it's been decades. One woman simply said, "Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late." When I saw that message, I pressed my hand to my heart and whispered, "It really isn't." I never thought peace would feel so quiet. For the first time in a long time, I didn't wake up with a knot in my stomach or the heavy shadow of regret pressing down on my chest. My room was still, the morning sun painting soft streaks of gold across the curtains. I lay in bed, listening to the silence, and realized I wasn't waiting for anything. No apology, no phone call, no closure, because I had finally given it to myself. Over the last few months, everything had changed. Not in some loud, fireworks in the sky kind of way, but like spring thawing the last grip of winter, slow, gentle, and full of new beginnings. Caleb and I had found our rhythm as friends. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when our eyes met a little too long, or a shared joke brought back a memory that made the silence afterwards stretch wider than it should. But we had made a decision to care for each other in a way that didn't require possession. And we stuck to it. My podcast had grown beyond anything I imagined. It wasn't just a platform anymore. It was a community, a lifeline, a place where people came to cry, to laugh, to remember, and to heal. Every week, I sat down at my mic with trembling fingers and an open heart, sharing stories that weren't always pretty but were always true. And the world listened. Still, there was one piece left, one chapter one hadn't written, one door I hadn't opened. My mother. I hadn't seen her in years. After everything she put me through, the distance, The silence, the moments I begged for her love and got cold stares in return. I had locked that chapter away and promised myself never to open it again. But healing has a strange way of turning our deepest wounds into keys. And one day, while talking about forgiveness on my podcast, I realized I was speaking more to myself than anyone else. So I found her. She wasn't hard to locate. A mutual friend from childhood gave me a phone number, and after a few deep breaths and days of pacing, I dialed it. The voice on the other end was older, shakier, but still hers. She was surprised. Quiet. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I've been waiting for this call." And so we met. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No storming out. Just two women, sitting in a small cafe, staring at cups of coffee we barely touched. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry for cutting you off. But I needed to protect myself. I was bleeding and didn't know how to ask you why you never tried to stop it." She looked at me, her eyes wet. "And I'm sorry for being the kind of mother you needed protection from. I didn't know how to be better." "My own mother." She paused. "She wasn't there either. I didn't know how to give what I never received." I cried. She cried. We both let out the kind of silence that lives inside pain, the kind that weighs on your chest for years until you finally name it. I told her everything. How her absence made me jealous of every mother I saw showing love. How it poisoned my relationship with Caleb. How I had pushed him away not because of him, but because I didn't understand what love between a mother and child was supposed to look like. I thought it was strange. I thought it was clingy. I thought it was dangerous. Because it was unfamiliar. She reached across the table and held my hand. For the first time in my life, I felt like her daughter. From that day on, we started again. Slowly, carefully, she came to a few of my podcast recordings. I invited her for lunch. We went shopping one weekend, and I caught her staring at me while I laughed at a joke. I asked why. "I just never thought I'd get to know you like this," she said. Then one evening, I did something I never imagined. I invited her to dinner. With Caleb and his mom. I was nervous. Not because I didn't trust her, but because this dinner felt like a bridge. A closing of one book and the opening of another. I wanted them to see the woman I had become. The girl who had once drowned in silence and sorrow but found her way back to the shore. The dinner was magical. Caleb's mom, ever so warm, hugged my mother like they had known each other for years. We shared stories. We cried. We laughed. I watched my mother and Caleb's mom nod along to each other's war stories, how they both fought alone to raise kids, how they both feared failing, and how love, no matter how late it arrives, still has the power to mend. After dinner, we sat in the garden. The air was soft, the stars gentle. Caleb looked at me and smiled. "I'm proud of you," he said. I looked back at him, my heart full. I'm finally proud of me, too. After everyone had gone home that night, my mother and I sat together in the guest room at my apartment. She had decided to stay the weekend. It felt surreal. There was a time when I would have paid just to hear her say she was proud of me, and now here she was under my roof, asking if I had enough blankets and whether I'd eaten dinner. We talked for hours. She told me about the years I didn't know, how she struggled with depression, how she felt unworthy of being a mother, how every time I needed her and she didn't show up, she hated herself a little more. She said she stayed away not because she didn't care, but because she was ashamed of all the ways she had already failed me. I told her I had carried that failure like it was mine, that I spent most of my teenage years thinking I wasn't good enough to be loved. And now, we were building something new, something fragile but real. Caleb texted later that night, "I'm happy for you. For both of you." I smiled at the screen, tears forming again. He had seen the ugliest parts of me and still chose kindness. I would always love him for that, even if our love had changed shape. The next morning, my mom helped me in the kitchen. We made pancakes and scrambled eggs like we had done it every Sunday of my childhood. It was awkward and perfect. I brought out a photo album I had kept hidden for years, old pictures from when I was little. One with her holding me in a hospital bed, tired but smiling. Another of us at the park, her pushing me on a swing. I never remembered those moments, but they were proof that, at some point, she tried. She looked through the album quietly. Then she touched one picture gently and whispered, "I don't deserve this." I looked at her and said, "Maybe not, but we both deserve a second chance." Later that week, I recorded a new podcast episode. It was called The Call You've Been Avoiding. I didn't mention names, but I told the story of a girl who grew up angry at a mother who vanished without explanation, of a woman who buried her pain so deep it spilled into every relationship she tried to build, of forgiveness, not the kind that erases, but the kind that acknowledges and chooses to move forward anyway. I ended the episode with a line I had written in my journal the night after our dinner. Love doesn't always arrive on time, but when it does, welcome it like a traveler who's come home from a long, hard journey. That episode went viral. Emails poured in. Messages. Calls. People told me it helped them make peace with parents, siblings, even with themselves. One woman said she drove 4 hours to visit her estranged father after hearing it. A man said he played it for his teenage daughter after years of barely speaking. It made me believe, truly believe, that stories can heal the world. That pain, when shared, becomes less lonely. That love, when spoken, becomes real. Weeks turned into months. My mother became part of my life in ways I never imagined. We took a weekend trip together, just the two of us. She taught me how to knit. I taught her how to use Instagram. She's still terrible at hashtags. Caleb remained a constant friend. Sometimes we would meet up for coffee, update each other on life. He started dating someone new, a kind, quiet girl who loved poetry and volunteered at animal shelters. When he told me, I felt a tiny ache in my chest. But it was soft, gentle, a reminder, not a wound. I was happy for him, truly, and I was happy for me. One night, as I sat on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and a cup of tea in my hand, my mother came outside and joined me. We sat in silence, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. "Do you ever think about what might have been different?" she asked. I nodded. All the time. "Would you change anything?" I thought about it, about all the pain, all the loneliness, all the mistakes. Then I shook my head. No, because it brought me here, to this moment, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. She smiled, tears in her eyes. And I realized then, some stories don't end in fireworks. They end in peace, in soft laughter, in pancakes on Sunday mornings, in a daughter forgiving her mother, and in a mother finally forgiving herself. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to Spesh Stories right here on YouTube. We share powerful stories like this, full of real emotions, brokenness, healing, and second chances. Because sometimes, it's not just about what we go through, it's about what we grow through. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay strong, forgive deep, and keep becoming.